Hi, this is Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and welcome to the Eclectic Radical live stream. My guest tonight is supposed to be Alan Grayson, but here we are. Good evening, Congressman. Can you hear me all right? My microphone says it's good. We can see the congressman, but we can't hear him yet. All right.
Hey, Chris, how's that?
That's a little better. We do have a stimulus.
Hey, how are you?
Hello, Congressman. Thank you. Pleasure to have you. Folks, this is my guest tonight is former Congressman Alan Grayson, author of High Crimes, The Impeachment of Donald Trump, and more importantly, The War Makes You Poor Act, which is the reason I originally became acquainted with his career. How are you doing tonight, Congressman? I think we're frozen again. Can you hear me okay? Appreciate you bearing with us, folks.
Well, Chris, I see your giant red mug. Can't hear you.
I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Would you like me to call in on my telephone?
Let me see if there's a better way for me to invite you. That's YouTube Messenger. That's not going to be reliable. Yeah, calling in might be the best way to do it. Yes, go ahead. All right. All right, testing.
Yep.
All right, let me adjust my
Good
volume.
way.
And go ahead and mute your, on the bottom left-hand side, the mute icon.
Okay. What should I mute? Oh, the internet connection.
Yeah, it'll be right there on the StreamYard screen on the bottom left-hand corner of that little bar. All right. I can hear you. Can you hear me? Sorry, what was that? I said I feel so 21st century now. Yes, let's go ahead. Ha 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 for a nice try. No, we're not putting his number up on the screen.
can hear you, and I can probably answer your question.
That's fair enough. I'm going to try to find out. Can everyone hear the congressman, or do we have a bad connection? Fern? And go ahead and let me know. Let me know how you're doing, Congressman, and we'll see how this goes.
Okay, I'm doing fine. I'm puzzled. I bought a Google Nest for my house, and I thought that problems like this would be a thing of the past.
I know the feeling. Internet conspires against us sometimes.
Brave new world.
Yeah, looks like we have laggy video, and there. Let's see if I can turn my volume up. All right, Congressman. Tell us a bit about the book while we try to get some sound checks going here.
Well, if you're referring to the book I wrote
last year, yes.
Earlier this year about impeachment, what I did was I reviewed every historical instance that ever occurred in state or federal government in the United States involving impeachment, went over the facts of each of those cases and showed that whatever it was the people had been impeached for, and every single occasion, Trump had done something worse. Whether you're talking about personal improprieties, personal corruption, tax evasion, whatever it might be, Trump had done something worse.
I'm aware of that argument. It's pretty convincing. There's a lot of specific things that other presidents have done, but Trump's done a little bit of everything, I think.
A lot of everything.
Plus
the bad stuff, though.
That's true. All right, I'm going to... Well, no, I can't mute my microphone. All right. So it looks like they...
turn down the sound from...
Perfect. Perfect.
Maybe I can do that on my computer. Let's see what happens.
Yes.
I'm turning down the speaker on my side. That should take care of that problem.
That should help, and it looks like we're passing our sound checks from the audience, so we are good. I appreciate you bearing with me, and thanks for calling my phone.
All right. Next time we'll try 2 cups to the strength. Yeah, that was.
My luck, that might be the only real way to go. The funny part is I work in tech support for a living, and I'm supposed to be able to conquer these obstacles. So I admit to having been a big fan of yours during Barack Obama's first term. And I was a great fan of the War Makes You Poor Act when it came out, simply because nobody else was talking about war at the time, which I really appreciated.
Right. If you simply made the Pentagon pay for the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq out of its own budget, back when I introduced that bill, rather than having a special extra bonus appropriation for war, you would have been able to eliminate federal income taxes for more than half of the population.
And that just says it all right there. Or, really radical things like paying for healthcare or cleaning up the environment, or who knows what else.
We get an awful lot of people who act like they're fed up because they should wear a mask in order to protect other people. When are those people going to realize that if they're making 10 or 12 or 15 bucks an hour, they're paying federal income taxes when billionaires are paying much lower rates than they are?
It's true. I know for a fact that
angry about something. Let's be angry about something that matters.
That's a good thing to be angry about. Amazon didn't pay any taxes for the last several years in a row, and yet they had the gall to interfere in the Seattle city government trying to elect a city council that wanted to tax them locally to help the homeless. And they threw a huge fit about that. It was gross. No federal taxes, but they can't pay local taxes.
Yeah, and I've watched Uber roll over any conceivable political opposition here in Central Florida.
They did.
For that SpaceX, so that it could use billions of dollars in free lunch facilities here in Central Florida built at taxpayer expense.
Uber just passed a very, very anti-worker law in California that undoes all the good work that the legislature had done trying to bring Uber to heel.
That's a sad situation. The law is up for sale for the highest bidder that way.
And I really don't like it. That's a lot of what my show is about, which is perfect to segue into stimulus, because it gets back to some of that ways the ways war makes you poor.
Well, right. I mean, we had an absolute orgy of corporate welfare earlier this year, a staggering amount, far beyond anything I'd ever seen before, even in the 2008, 2009, 2010 bailouts.
And
huge amounts of money being flooded into the economy to special interests. I'll give you my favorite example, the Main Street program that the Fed created. The basic elements of the program are that you can borrow over a multi-year period from the Federal Reserve with a Federal Reserve guarantee 3 years of whatever your profits were as a business last year in 2019, 3 times whatever your profits were last year at a 2% interest rate, even if you're bankrupt.
wow.
You haven't sold a single widget to any customer this year, haven't cut a single head of hair if you're in the haircut business. You can borrow 3 times that amount from the Fed that you made last year, just so that they can flush money into the economy and really put it into the hands of businesses, even failed businesses.
Or even businesses that aren't as small as they were supposed to be in some cases.
No, the one exception that they set aside is that they absolutely will not give any loans to people who are not incorporated. In other words, you literally have to be a corporation, working as a corporation, in order to get this corporate welfare. If you are on your own, if you're a sole proprietor, and you simply operate, let's say, a plumbing business or a hair salon, something like that, you don't get any money from them at all. You have to incorporate as a business in order to be able to get that money.
That's kind of makes it really hard for mom and pop who own a donut shop, or the guy who owns a greasy spoon.
Right, and you ask yourself, what kind of thinking goes into making that particular limit? They won't limit massively profitable companies from borrowing from the Fed at 2% interest over many years, but they will limit mom and pop shops and forbid that.
That's just that just goes to show how wealth redistribution really works in this country. They say they're against it, but it turns out they're for it, just only upwards.
Yeah, in one of my hearings when I was on the Financial Services Banking Committee way back when, in the period that you're talking about, 2009, 2010, I got one of the Fed big shots to testify, and I went over a deal that the Fed had made with Citibank. Not exactly a mom and pop operation for
Not
sure.
exactly.
Where Citibank handed over a bunch of assets to the Fed, got to keep all of the profitable ones, In other words, if they sold at a profit, that money went back to Citibank. So the Fed took 90% of losses, and even the dividend and interest payments that were coming from those assets went to Citibank and not the Fed. So my question was, where could I get a deal like that? Where could you get a deal like that? Where could anybody else get a deal like that? We have socialism in this country, and in effect, it's socialism for big corporations.
Well, it's true, and what's funny is that isn't new. The late David Graeber, in his wonderful book Debt, which I recommend strongly to everyone, says that the rich have always been communist. That prior to our modern capitalist system, the rich just sort of borrowed from each other left and right and never worried about paying each other back. And usually were able to steal somebody else's wealth if they actually needed to pay somebody back.
Well, this year, all of that was in full flower. The interesting thing is that there was no reaction to it. Where was the Democrat who stood up and said, excuse me, but why is it that the checks that are going out to individuals represent less than 15% of this emergency relief that we are sending out to people, while the corporate welfare is well over half of it? Where was that person this year who was saying, excuse me, but the emperor has no clothes?
I really didn't see anyone doing that. I mean, there were people who said we need more stuff for the little guy, but nobody really called out the huge handout to all the companies and billionaires that are now richer than ever.
And, we do end up paying for it. There is this notion that the Fed can do whatever it wants and has no effect on anybody's. It never hurts anybody to cheapen and destroy the value of the dollar. But look at what happened. The dollar has now lost 13% of its value against the euro in March, and the euro is a completely fictitious currency that's literally backed by nothing. The dollar at least is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. The euro is backed by nothing.
Well,
and yet, because of the inducement of the inflation of the value of assets in this country, this artificial hyper-stimulation of the value of assets in this country, thanks to the Fed, the reaction to that is the fact that the dollar is losing against some of the weakest currencies in history.
well, I mean, that's what happens when you care about your own currency primarily as a tool of empire and less about whether it's actually worth anything at home.
We're losing to the euro when, for instance, Italy's GNP is now lower than it was in 2008. So 12 years of literally zero or negative growth in one of the 3 or 4 major countries in the EU, the largest economies in the EU. And France is also in very bad shape economically. And yet, somehow the dollar loses value while the euro increases its value.
Well, France and Germany have the advantage of being the majority owners of the banking institutions that back up the EU. If your quasi-state banks are the quasi-independent, I'm trying to think of the right word, the people who make the economic decisions for the country, then it's really sort of the same situation where we can do what we want with the dollar because of the military, our military. They can do what they want because of the World Bank.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned Germany. In Germany, every state government has a bank.
Yeah.
And they're very large operations. here only one out of 50 state governments has a bank, the Bank of North Dakota.
Yes.
And that bank is doing extremely well economically, just like the state was doing extremely well until it decided to be the COVID capital of the world by everybody refusing to wear masks. But until then, the state economy is doing very well because they had a state institution that could supply capital.
And was much better at supplying capital to the lower ends of the economic totem pole than the private banks. Let's not forget that.
Right. State banks don't redline.
Makes a big difference. In fact, that's the one thing that I always thought that Bernie got wrong in 2016 is that how will breaking up the big banks stop racism? If he had been really on his ball, he would have come back, well, who does the redlining? And that would have made a difference maybe. But spilt milk.
All right, so I'm going to try to get back into your studio here. I muted the connection again. I'm going to enter the studio and see what happens.
It's showing you. Let's see how this works. Add to stream.
Oh, there I am.
Yep.
This might be a better connection. Do you want me to try to...
Yeah, let's give it a try. I'll turn my speaker off for a moment on the phone.
All right, let's see what happens.
Speaker off for a moment on the phone.
All right, let's see what I have unmuted him, but you can hear me. Okay?
I can. I hear a little bit of our lag from behind, but I hear you.
All right, let's extend this experiment. I'm going to try to increase the volume here. I'll hang up if I can hear you if I increase the volume.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Sorry about that horrendous close up right there. I guess you got to see every freckle I still have.
Well, I managed to hide.
So I can hear you.
All right. So sounds like there's a bit of a lag, but I can hear you when you speak.
All right. I just hung up on you. I'm hoping I can hear you. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, no, it sounds like there's a lag and that I'm coming through late on your side.
No, we still have the sound problem from your end, so I'm going to call you back.
All right.
And we'll go back to doing it the way we were doing it.
All right.
Sorry about that. You are muted.
Perfect. And speaker is on.
Okay, sorry about that.
No.
You're being able to count all the blackheads on my nose. Sorry about all of it.
It is what it is.
It is what it is.
I appreciate the effort. All right.
All right,
All right.
That's a real competition stopper. What should we talk about now?
Well, let's see. We had been talking about we had said what Democrats stood up. Nobody said anything about that. So where are we now? $600 checks. I mean, that's just sort of the insult on top of everything else. It took us 6 months to agree to a second round of stimulus, and we're giving everybody $600.
Well, here's an interesting calculation. All right, there's about 200 million adults in the country, and the first stimulus package, the $1,200 check, that was $4 trillion.
Yep.
So let's do that math. If we we hadn't wasted so much of that on corporate welfare. We just handed it out in equal amounts to every American country. How big would those checks have been? What's $4 trillion divided by 200?
Oh, I have a calculator here, or I did. 4 trillion. That's million. That's billion. That's trillion. Divided by 300 million, we said?
No, there's about 200 million adults.
200 million.
A little more than that, but let's go with 200 million.
That's $20,000 per person. I mean, that would actually.
Should have gotten. We already should have gotten first.
Yeah, and that seems fair under the circumstances.
Yeah, did you get your 20,000?
Ha 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 ha. No.
I'm wondering when people are going to start demanding that. What was it? Was it a $500 Medicare drug card that Trump promised us just before the election?
Yes.
Which completely made up.
Yes.
When are we going to start demanding that? I mean, I heard the words come out of his mouth.
Well, he's already trying to swing the Georgia Senate race in his favor by trying to say he's going to make sure $2,000 checks go out, like the bill that's sitting in committee that even Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to bring to the floor. Except, how the heck can he do that? He can't.
No, I mean, even Louis XIV eventually found out that the phrase "l'état c'est moi" is not valid, and he has a lot more authoritarian power than Donald Trump could have. L'état c'est moi, the state is me, the government is me.
Yeah.
That's the assumption that Trump's been making since the beginning.
Well, that's pretty much he seems to have the idea that the U.S. government is just another business that he and his family can run as they see fit. And I suppose that's from all this, well, we should run the country more like a business that politicians have been saying since the 70s.
I'm not happy with the redistribution up to the top that the Fed has been conducting all year long since the crisis began. But I will tell you that if the Fed had done nothing, then Trump's real agenda, which was to impoverish the entire country, would have been in full flower by then. We needed some kind of monetary response. If the Fed had simply said to everybody, we'll lend you $20,000 to do whatever you want as long as you spend it by the end of the year, and then you can pay that back over the next 5 years, the way they're doing with major corporations now, at 2% interest. Then I think that would have had an enormously beneficial effect on the economy. But of course, that's not how things work. The Fed simply stuffs huge amounts of cash into the largest, deepest pockets it can find, rather than you and me.
Well, as far as I'm able to understand, too, I'm more on the bottom end of the scale, so I don't quite have all the ways rich people do things down. But the way I understand it, the more money you have, the less of the money you have you actually spend, and the more you invest or save, where it might do some things, but it's not driving that consumer economy that everything depends on these days.
Oh, it's worse than that. It's actually quite a bit worse than that. It's not so much that's the marginal propensity to save, which is the economic term for what you just described, is not the biggest problem that we have right now. The sense that the more money you have, the less you can spend on goods and services. The biggest problem that we've had, which has been going on now for almost a decade, in full flower, is the fact that roughly $1 trillion gets taken out of the purchase of goods and services in the U.S. economy and is spent on stock buybacks every year. that's an equivalent to the other major problem we have, which is that we spend roughly $1 trillion more on foreign goods and services than we export to other countries. And that also drains $1 trillion out of the purchase of goods and services in this country produced by Americans. So we have the two twin pillars of economic disruption operating year after year, removing $2 trillion that's produced and earned by people in the United States from the acquisition of goods and services in the United States. We make that up through borrowing from other countries, and we make that up through cheapening our own currency, and we make that up through the federal deficit and the federal debt. $2 trillion a year removed from our economy for those two purposes.
But a Raytheon board member is going to be Secretary of Defense, so we know that some of that there's going to be a whole lot of government money going back into at least one sector of our economy. Unfortunately, right. The only things they export.
People have recognized for 75 years now that one General Smedley Butler once put it, war is a racket.
Yes.
That's been widely current in people's minds now for the past 3/4 of the century. Less obvious to people is the fact that NAFTA basically broke our economic system.
Yes.
We've ended up with huge, enormous, staggering trade deficits now, $1 trillion a year for 2 decades, starting at only $200 billion, now working up to $1 trillion. Plus now this new phenomenon which people don't even talk about, we did never, that enormous amounts of money are being spent on not on the acquisition of goods or services, but on running up the price on a shrinking supply of corporate stocks in this country. The net amount of corporate stocks in this country because of stock buyback is actually much lower than it was 10 years ago. So you have more and more cash and profit chasing fewer and fewer actual shares of stock to be bought. No wonder the stock market is going up the way that it is.
And now,
but both of those things take money out of the acquisition of goods and services, and therefore the real economy that really employs people.
Well, Adam Smith, and a lot of people don't realize this, Adam Smith actually wrote The Wealth of Nations because he was against big corporations and wanted more entrepreneurship. Now, that's not the way capitalism went, but that was the idea he had at the time. These huge joint stock companies backed by the king owned everything. They would get a license to plunder a new colony, and their stock would go through the roof until someone realized they weren't actually doing anything but plundering overseas, and then the stock would crash, and the original investors would make a fortune, but a whole lot of people would go broke at the end.
It's funny that you mentioned that book. This is a funny coincidence. I'm actually discussing that book with my 2 15-year-olds in the car 3 or 4 days ago, and I told them that Smith has this reputation for being an arch capitalist, but it's not true at all. First, he condemned what you just condemned, and you're right about that. Secondly, he said the wealth of nations actually rests primarily on people specializing the division of labor, the concept that he really originated and created. And he said that when you have time to work on one narrow thing, you get really good at it, and that contributes enormously to the wealth of nations, which is true. And then he said that the wealth of nations is undermined by businessmen getting together and setting monopolies. And our economy is just jam-packed full of monopolies and oligopolies that Smith roundly condemned. He said that people who get together to raise prices are the arch enemies of capitalism.
That's true. And of course, we forget these days capitalism was revolutionary when the king owned everything.
Yeah, I mean, capitalism works with competition, and we're seeing large areas of the economy where there's no competition at all. Everything from Google advertising to your cable company. When you get lucky because technology keeps creating competition for these companies over time, but there's no inevitability for that. That's just recent good fortune.
And history shows that the monopolies that do best are government monopolies and not corporate monopolies. So if it's really something that has to be monopolized, why are we letting these for-profit racketeers do it?
Yeah, when I was a judge's assistant working with Judge Ginsburg and others at the D.C. Circuit before she was elevated to the Supreme Court, we had in that courthouse the AT&T breakup case and a number of other cases that were similar to that, where there was actual recognition that if you had one company providing 90% of the telephone service in this country, it was not going to be good for consumers. You don't have anything resembling that recognition these days. The FCC, until the last 5 minutes or so, has been an absolute horse for years. And whatever you want to call monopoly, it's not capitalism.
No, that's feudalism. That ends up with a feudalism.
Right.
The AT&T case, it's funny you mention that, because AT&T has essentially reconstituted Ma Bell and is bigger than ever, because now it's television and media as well as telecommunications.
Well, we have, and now at this point, 90% of the cell phone market didn't even exist at that time. I mean, we didn't even have those brick cell phones that communicate with satellites way back when. Right now, we have 90% of the cell phone market in this country dominated by two legacy companies that were left through the breakup of AT&T. Imagine if the breakup had never happened, then we wouldn't have any real competition at all, even for cell phones.
It's what's really fascinating is that a lot of the things that we think of as the basic necessities of cell phone service were invented by a linesman at AT&T during the monopoly, and AT&T sat on the patents because they didn't, with no competition, they had no incentive to bring anything new to market. So he made money the only way he could, which was helping the mob forward their calls so that the FBI couldn't spy on them. And
the pulse telephone was widely used until NCI, Sprint, and a company that I actually was the first president of IDT, brought competition to the telephone market. And the rest is history. People now have an amazing array of gadgets in their pocket instead of pulse telephones, which you might still be using, not for the impact of competition.
And it makes a big difference. At the same time, I think we're starting to get to the point, especially when it comes to international matters, we need to start finding ways to cooperate instead of compete if we want to survive.
Well, over time, the threat of war seems to be dampening down a bit, unless you have to be, unfortunately, in Syria or Afghanistan or a number of other places. Still,
any other place that's tried to go off the dollar.
Or any other place that gets sort of on the wrong side of the permanent bipartisan foreign policy that dominates thinking in Washington, D.C.
That's true.
So, I think that there are fewer disruptions than there used to be. But look at what's happening now. We have Russia committing one cyber tampering after another. It's clear that the only practical way to prevent that is to together with allies and try to punish it. There's no other way practical. You can't bomb Russia because of anything like that.
This is somewhere though where my hackles go up here a little bit, and I always end up having to push back a little because really the people who are telling us that it's Russia are people who are only important if national security has defined an enemy to be wary of. And as terrorism starts to become less of a specter on the horizon and people are worried about other things, it seems like suddenly trying to start up the Cold War again with Russia is too convenient for the people who want to keep making us poor with the racket.
I think it is fair to say that the military-industrial complex has called out 9 out of the last 2 genuine security threats to the United States. They're constantly trying to. I lived through that as in Congress and went to all of their classified briefings, some of which verged on farcical. But that being said, I am convinced that Russia is doing the thing that the national security and military industrial complex generally says it is doing. It is a guilty party, and the reason for that is that it furthers their national interests in tangible ways that never get deterred or punished. Russia is, in essence, a rational actor. They found weapons that they can deploy, that they can deploy without facing any consequences. Until now, they have the chief apologist sitting in the White House for the past 4 years. So, I mean, reasonable people can disagree.
Sure.
That's true. But that's how I see it.
No, and I'm not. I mean, it makes rational sense for Russia to want to push back against encirclement. You mentioned Louis XIV. Louis XIV was all about not being encircled himself, and France fought quite a lot of wars to break what he saw as the encirclement by enemy powers. And Russia has that same fear. So that makes perfect sense up to a point.
If you actually listen to what the people in these countries say to each other, you get a strong sense of that. Same thing with Iran. Actually bother to read the speeches that they've made. You'll see that the Iranians are fear-stricken by the fact that they've had a large deployment of U.S. forces, at one point 150,000 U.S. forces in Afghanistan and Iraq. In both countries, at one point, the numbers were closer to 50,000. And one's on one border, and the other's on the other border. And then, they realized also that there were large U.S. forces in Kuwait for a long period of time, which is right across the bay from them, barely 20 miles away. They know that we've been supplying arms to the UAE and Saudi Arabia, who are also their enemies.
Yep.
So encircle, very good description of how Iran feels. You don't have to wonder why they'd want a nuclear weapon under those circumstances.
If
they have one, but I am suggesting that I understand why they want one.
Well, no, and speaking, I'll be the first person to say that when it comes to foreign policy, I tend to think of the United States as the bad guy more than the good guy, simply because of the way we throw our weight around. And so I understand why every country that doesn't have a nuke wants one if they have anything that the U.S. might want at some point in the future. I don't think they should necessarily have them. I think fewer nukes are good. But if I were the head of state of some country in Latin America or the Middle East or Asia, and I had a reasonable amount of wealth and some sort of national resource that the United States was going to want, yes, I would want a nuclear weapon too. I would be scared. It makes perfect sense to me. I don't think we need more nukes, but of course people want them. Look at us. Look at how we act.
Well, I think we've maybe lost the thread a bit. And I understand why. I mean, we went through a long period when people felt like the United States, well, they were being personally threatened.
Mm-hmm.
I think the coronavirus has shifted people's attention on directions. But for a long time, Americans felt like they were being personally threatened. And of course, that would galvanize your attention. But the foreign policy successes that we've had over the years are simply successes by being good people, people with a heart who actually try to alleviate suffering. First time I went to Africa, I've been to Africa more than a dozen times. First time I went to Africa, I went to Kenya, and in Africa, throughout Africa, you have people whose job it is to help. They attach themselves to visitors. They do whatever they need to do in order to be able to ingratiate themselves legitimately, errands, whatever it might be, carrying a bag and so on, and they get paid for that. Well, the first time I went to Africa, one of these helpers attached himself to me, and I was there for a long time on that trip. About 4 days into it, I realized he hadn't asked me for any money. And I thought, that's really weird. What's going on there? So I asked him. I said, we've been together for 4 days now, and you haven't asked me for any money. At what point are you going to ask me to pay you for your services? And he said, I'm not sure I'm ever going to ask you to pay for my services. I said, well, why is that? And he said, because when I was a young boy, a plane flew overhead when I was starving and my family was starving. We were so desperate that we were eating grass because of famine. The plane flew overhead. It had a U.S. flag on it. Out dropped a box from the belly of the plane. It was an enormous box. It crash landed on the ground, and out came food in bags, in canvas bags, from that box inside that plane. And the reason why I've been helping you for the past few years is not asking for any money, is because I want to say thanks. I know you're an American. I want to say thanks. And that was real and touching. That's the kind of foreign policy that makes a difference. That really does win people's hearts and minds.
That definitely sounds like the sort of thing we should be doing in Africa instead of getting Ethiopia to invade Somalia for us, because we had too much trouble doing it on our own. Yes.
Right. That's right. My phone's dying, so I think we're going to have to try to wrap.
I think I promised a shorter show to you because of the time zone, and I've kept you longer than expected anyway. So I was about to mention that myself. Thank you very much, Congressman, for joining us. Please feel free to call or text if you ever want to come back. And thanks for being a good sport with the phone and the technical difficulties. I really appreciate it.
I'd be happy to do that. Thank you very much. I guess I wish if I come back, I'm going to have to get some plastic surgery here to present better on your show.
Well, you notice that I don't worry hugely about my own presentability, at least not by normal mainstream media standards. So that's all right.
All right. I enjoyed it very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You have a great night. I appreciate it, Congressman.
Bye.
Bye. And thanks for joining us and Congressman Grayson, folks. I apologize for the technical difficulties, and I really appreciate the hanging in there with the speakerphone. I hope everybody enjoyed the show despite our trouble. I had a great time talking to the congressman. I'm glad we had some great comments from the chat that I wish I had a more time to spend on. And I hope you all have a great night. Thanks for joining me, and thank you, Niall. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I appreciate it. Niall's my partner, folks. Check us out. We're going to be off on Political Hack and Slash this week, but we will be back on January 2nd. And the reason I didn't correct him on socialism is because I find the term communism of the rich, even though it's not accurate, is extremely descriptive of the way rich people actually function. That's worth its own show. When I have a solo show again, I am going to do something on the Johnson County War, which has a lot of communism of the rich stuff that goes into it. Again, thanks everybody for joining us. I hope you all have a great night. This has been the Eclectic Radical. I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and I'll tweet at you guys. Take care.